And I was able to hit the button, Thea.
Yay, I see us live.
Give me today my daily bread. Help me to walk alone ahead. Though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no love. Oh, my smile, my mind reassure me I don't need no one. Woke up this morning with my mind set on loving me. With my mind set on loving me. Woke up this morning with my mind set on loving me. With my mind set on loving me. I'm not lonely, I'm alone, and I'm holy by my own. I'm not lonely, I'm alone, and I'm holy by my own. Yea, the bad days may come, the lover may leave, the winter may not. Hey, the map of your palms, the temple you be, you're all that you got. Yea, the bad days may come, the lover may leave, the winter may not. Hey, the map of your palms, the temple you be, you're all that you got. Though I walk through the darkest valley, I will feel love. Say I hold my woke up this morning with my mind set on loving me. With my mind set on loving me. Woke up this morning with my mind set on loving me. With my mind set on loving me. I'm not lonely, I'm alone, and I'm holy by my own. I'm not lonely, I'm alone by my own. My cup is full up, what I got is enough. Nobody completes me, don't mess with my stuff. My cup is full up, what I got is enough. Nobody completes with my love. Surely, 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 goodness and mercy shall follow me. Shall follow me. Shall follow me.
There's an old friend that I once heard say something that touched my heart, and it began this way. Was born by the river and just like the river, I've been running ever since. He said it's been a long to my brother, and I asked him, brother, could you help me, please? He said, good sister, I'd like to, but I'm not able. And when I looked around, I was right back down and on my bended knee. Yes, I was. Oh, there've been times that I thought that I wouldn't last for long, but somehow, right now, I believe that I'm able to carry on. I tell you that it's been a long and oh, it's been an uphill journey all the way. But I know a change is gonna come. Sometimes I have to cry all night long. Yes, I did. Sometimes I had to give up right for what I knew was wrong. Yeah, it's sure been a long way coming. Yes, it has. It's been real hard every step of the way. But I believe this evening a change has come. Yeah, a change has come.
Come to your river. I will come to your river. Come to your river.
Wash my soul,
I will come to your river.
wash my soul,
I will come to your river.
wash my soul again. Carry away my dead leaves, let me baptize my soul with the help of your waters. Sink my pains and complaints, let the river take them. River, drown them. My ego and my blame, let me baptize my soul with the help of your waters. Those old means, so ashamed, let the river take them. River, drown them.
Come to your river. I will come to your river. I will come to your river. Come to your river.
Wash my soul,
I will come to your river.
wash my
Hi, welcome. Welcome to Black Spatial Relics. And we're so excited to be with you today. For those who are wanting closed captioning and weren't here yesterday, you can find the closed caption button at the bottom of your Zoom menu. It should say closed captioning. If you click on that, it's going to give you a menu of a few items, and you can write, you can click on show subtitle, and it's going to pull those up for you. And if the subtitles aren't big enough for you or small enough for you, you can change the size as well. That should be the second or third item on that closed captioning menu button. Feel free to write the panelists or me if you'd like any support along the way and are having troubles. Otherwise, I'll pass it to...
Hello, welcome. Welcome y'all to our second evening of programming in this, our second convening. My name is Ariel Julia Brown. I am the founder and director of Black Spatial Relics. I want to welcome you to this space, and though in this pandemic we join each other virtually, I'm calling from, and we are based on Lenni Lenape land. This place, also known as Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Here we are gathering to center the Black cultural traditions and innovations of this site and the great work of Black diasporic network building and exchange that is of this place and of many other places where Black folks have congregated and built. Black Spatial Relics is a space that amplifies the importance of Black radical performance traditions in relation to land, site, and place through the championing of works about and in conversation with slavery, justice, and freedom. Over the last 5 years, we've offered residencies, microgrants, programming, and convenings to gather Black artists and amplify I'm going to speak a little slower, and amplify their work that is undoubtedly moving us toward our collective freedom. This convening works with Philadelphia as a site of multi-century Black diasporic exchange and power building. As Black Spatial Relics expands to offer residencies to Black radical performance makers in the Caribbean this year, we want to take the space to consider this multi-century dialectic between Philadelphia and the Caribbean at this convening. You will see resonances of this dialectic across our programming further into this week as we share space with some brilliant Black performance makers and freedom dreamers from Philadelphia, the Caribbean, and around the US. And still, it's also important to note that the Black performance traditions of this place reverberate, accumulate, and compound across the larger diaspora. I want to invite us into 3 collective breaths in gratitude for the Black folks who make this space and all other spaces of Black dreaming and organizing possible on all sides of time, on all sides of the veil, on all sides of land and water. Thank you. And now, as we are gathered more fully, I want to thank our media partners in this convening. I want to thank the US Department of Arts and Culture for their work to amplify this work. We want to thank HowlRound for their work to amplify through streaming and archiving this work. And we want to thank our thought partners with the Center for Experimental Ethnography for their amplification and support of Black spatial relics this year and over the years. We also want to thank Added Velocity, which is administered by Temple Contemporary at Tyler School of Art and Architecture at Temple University and funded by William Penn Foundation for their support of this convening. If you're not already joining us for the rest of the week, we hope that you will. We hope that you will continue with us on this journey, on this road. And if you are social, as we are, we ask that you use the hashtag BSR5 or hashtag Black Spatial Relics as you are being social. Today, we get the distinctive privilege of sitting with Ada Pinkston, Crystal Z Campbell, Danielle Deadwyler, and Misty Sol, all of whom are 2020 Black Spatial Relics artists in residence. Over the course of their residencies, these 4 artists have been in the process of developing new work, and we will hear about each of those works over the next while. Much of the digging that they've done over the last really 6 or more months was facilitated by Omiyoshun Joniel Jones, who is our brilliant dramaturg in residence over the last year. And through their joint dramaturgy sessions, the artists have been in conversation with each other and with themselves about how to enter more fully into their work as they are sharing and building it. So we'll hear from the artists. I will ask a few questions, and then we'll open it up to folks on the Zoom chat and on Facebook to be able to gather questions from y'all. So our first presenter is Ada Pinkston. Ada is a multidisciplinary artist, educator, and cultural organizer. Her art explores the intersection of imagined histories, and socio-political realities on our bodies using monoprint, performance, video, and collage. Intersubjective exchanges are the primary substrate of her work. Ada Pinkston is also the creator of No Name Tongues. No Name Tongues is a mixed media performance artwork that is the next iteration of Landmarked, a multi-platform art project that is about exploring architectural objects that we call monuments. Pinkston is producing a new body of work that examines the ways that language and culture have shape shift into multiple forms in the Americas as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. This performance and video work is considering what it means to create a hybrid dialectic in the context of survival. She is using Hampton National Historic Site as a point of departure for this performance. Hand-painted textile, collaboratively produced with students from Baltimore County Public Schools, is an integral part of the site-specific set installation design. Welcome, Ada.
Hello. I thank you for that wonderful introduction, Ariel. I can't play my video, but I am really delighted to be here with you guys. And I'm excited to have this conversation with you all as well. For some reason, it's saying that my video cannot start. It says unable. You can't start your video because the host has stopped it. But I don't know. I guess I'm just hitting video over and over, but that's okay. So maybe this is a part of the work, right? Because a lot of this work that I'm doing is about considering how do we create portraits when the portraits are not in the archive. So I came to the Hampton National Historic Site in the fall of 2019 when I was asked to do a community art workshop with students from Baltimore County. And for folks that are not familiar with the story of the Hampton National Historic Site, it was named a property of the National Park Service in 1948, following 7 generations of ownership by the Ridgely family. And at the height of this, okay, it's telling me I can start my video. Okay, I think my video is on now, but it's not showing up. But okay, so
We
what I
can
was,
see you. Yeah. Ada, your video is showing.
oh, okay, so it's just not showing up on my screen, which is totally fine. Great. Basically, the Hampton Mansion is a site of a lot of stories that have been ignored by the archive. At the height of this family's wealth, they owned 24,000 acres from Baltimore County to Baltimore City. And currently, if you go to this site, there's a series of portraits that you find on the walls. And up until recently, so this story of focusing on the architecture, this Georgian architecture, is common in the United States, right? Instead of thinking about the labor of the people that took to build this architecture, this is something that that I have been trying to sit with and conjure in this ongoing body of work. Dr. Cheryl LaRoche at University of Maryland College Park has done a series of ethnographic studies about the labor at the site. And I'm using this as well in the development of this work. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. Well, so this is a view up. Okay. That last slide was a view of the farm at the Hampton Mansion. So every year, the Baltimore County Public Schools invites, or the school district invites students to come to the site to participate in this program called Art on the Farm. And Art on the Farm is a way to engage people with the story. However, another part of this community art experience is that usually Art on the Farm is just usually focused on the landscape, right? Instead of the stories of the people that live there. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see some images of this collaborative work that was made. Next slide. Over a course of 2 days with hundreds of students from Baltimore County. And you can see that each one of the students, so there's a collaboration between pre-K and senior students. And in these collaborations, you see the different hands and the different critical fabulations, right? The imagining of what the potential portraits of the laborers are, the portraits of the laborers who are not on the walls in the house. So one laborer whose image is in the house is Nancy. And Nancy was a woman who was, sorry about that, was a woman who was enslaved. Her name was Nancy Davis, and she, you know, she stayed on the site. So the questions from the archive is interesting to consider, because as an artist, I have the space and the freedom to imagine what the historical data does not say, right? And the historical data and the historical narrative that has been told up until very recently is that Nancy Davis wanted to stay at the end of the institution of slavery. And because this family treated her so well, right? But I think that there's more to that story, and that's what this performance is about. And she, you know, as you see in this slide, she was buried at the Ridgely gravesite, which was completely abnormal at the time. Go to the next slide, please. So, you know, 19th century moments, right? It's very hard to find an image that captures a Black person in 1863. And I wondered, when I saw this image, I wondered what was going through her head and what methods and mechanisms did she use for her own survival, and what methods and mechanisms did she use to stay healthy and safe internally. So this is a story that, as I said, was very much, it was elevated in the National Historic Site narrative. However, the story of another person that was enslaved at the site has been often removed or ignored because there is no picture of her. There is no image of her that can be used as a way to point out or articulate her presence. But there is a court document. Can you go to the next slide, please? Next slide. So Lucy Jackson is a person who basically left the Hampton estate as soon as she could. So while Nancy's image was being captured in 1863, Lucy Jackson left. And after she left, she sued the Ridgely family for her belongings. And so she was purchased in 1838, and her sons left at the beginning of the Civil War to fight for the Union cause, or fight for their freedom, basically. And in 1863, she arrived in Washington, D.C., and these court documents are the only elements of the archive that I have found of her image. So with that, I'm just going to end, you know, so this body of work is a series of abstractions that are movement based at the site. And I have this silk image behind me because in the court documents, it lists that she had 6 common dresses, 9 good dresses, 4 silk dresses, furs, and a muff, and other articles of great value that belong to her that the Ridgeleys need to give back to her. And this is in a court document in 1866. And the Ridgely family responded that other servants at the Hampton had already sent Lucy all of her effects. So it's interesting to think about, I'm interested in thinking about how do we create spaces for this dialogue between these two women who are creating spaces for themselves to feel whole. And I'm gonna end this with a quote. So behind me is a video of silk, right? So the way that she was able to acquire this silk was through her husband. So her husband was a freed person, and he purchased these items for her while she was enslaved. And, you know, she wanted her stuff back, basically. So I'm just trying to conjure her. I'm trying to conjure her and trying to create this conversation through this performance. And here's a quote by Toni Morrison that I wanted to read. Storytelling, myth, belief, and magic. These are also important. Truth lies in our myths, in our songs. That's where the seeds are. It's not possible to constantly hone on the crisis. You have to have the love and you have to have the magic. So it is my aim in this work to materialize this magic. And I'm gonna end it there and pass it back to Ariel.
Thank you. Thank you, Ada. That was beautiful. I'm all in my feelings and in my clothes right now. I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm going to I am going to now introduce Crystal Z Campbell. Crystal Z Campbell is a multidisciplinary artist. Experimental filmmaker, and writer of African-American, Filipino, and Chinese descents. Campbell finds complexity in the public secret, or a fragment of information which is known by many but perhaps undertold or unspoken. Crystal is the creator of Slick. Slick is a series of live performances, workshops, and a publication with fictionalized and historical narratives around Tulsa's former Black Wall Street community, Greenwood, in the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre, and the story of oil. Performance sites and gestures are will be directly related to Tulsa's history of continued displacement and land grabs, extraction, environmental racism, and food deserts. 3 performances and workshops will consider sound, gesture, sight, and collective memory to shift our relationship to the way we see our city, her city, as well as how we can change our perceptions of history. In workshops and rehearsals, she will expand on suggestions made by Augusto Boal in Theater of the Oppressed to further develop these performances, which will engage the Black community in questions of social justice. Welcome, Crystal.
Hi, everyone. And sorry for that haze. I think it makes me look very blurry, but hopefully the images that we'll share are in higher resolution. Thank you, Ariel, for this introduction, and most importantly, for this incredible platform, Black Spatial Relics. I just wanted to note that Ariel is an arts leader that leads with a quiet and unassuming yet resolute power. Thank you for tuning in the middle of the week, in the middle of everything. My name again is Crystal Z Campbell. I'm based in the middle of the country, precisely in Oklahoma, better known as Indian Territory, on Kiowa, Osage, Wichita, and Kickapoo land. I am interested in the archive, and I'm interested in sort of interrogating the archive to consider the politics of the witness, SLIC is an experimental film-based project in progress, considering the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre as an event that left the renowned Black community of Greenwood firebombed. Greenwood was one of over 50 Black settlements that developed in Indian Territory after the Civil War. The film will be constructed using archival materials that are hand-painted or digitally manipulated, along with original film footage and live performances. I am interested in the slippages between gesture and movement in relationship to spatial politics. I'm interested in how representation of an event has the potential to shift or obscure narrative and to alter the perception of a place. I am less interested in defining the narrative. I know that there will be many other versions of the Tulsa Race Massacre narrative that will arise over the course of this centennial year and beyond. To start, I wanted to share a few images from works I've developed over the years, most of which were developed while living in Tulsa over the last 5 years. This first image is a work called Paradise, and it's an installation from 2013 that incorporated a room featuring a blue illuminated void on the ceiling. The room smelled like burning wood with no source of fire in sight. I wanted to create a space to consider the lack of accountability in this act of domestic terrorism. If we go to the next slide, this is a work called Searcher, which is a public light meditation that was erected in 2016 and again in 2017, unannounced. The light served as a public meditation for those that have yet to be identified as victims of the Tulsa Race Massacre. And we can move to the next slide. This installation, Notes from Black Wall Street, is an installation in a mailroom at the Condé Nast building in Manhattan. A site, the Condé Nast building, of course, is where these magazines such as Vogue and Glamour were produced. And this installation featured 21 painted archival images and a historical report about the race massacre that viewers could take away piece by piece and reassemble in the mailroom. I wanted to think about, in this particular context of this particular building, the representation of those images and how they are distributed and the power that images hold in that repetition. We go to the next slide. So this image is Notes from Black Wall Street, where I'm considering Saidiya Hartman's project of critical fabulation to make tangible these archival images of yet to be identified Greenwood residents following the massacre of 1921. Next slide. And this is the final slide. This is a film still from the current project, SLIC, featuring Tulsa-based performer Nikos Norris. Here we've returned to I-44, using movement and sound to interrogate the intersection of cars, urban renewal, and oil on the exact highway that displaced the rebuilt Greenwood community. On the cusp of the 100th anniversary of the massacre, this highway is unfortunately a monument too. Thank you so much for your time. I'll pass the mic back to Ariel.
Thank you so much, Crystal. Thank you so much for the expansiveness of your work and for your generosity in all ways and directions. I want to now introduce Danielle Deadwyler is a multidisciplinary performance artist. I'm sorry, y'all. Every time the slide changes, I had to lose my text. Danielle Deadwyler is a multidisciplinary performance artist, actor, and filmmaker. Danny is the creator of Untitled, or Rules for Unsticking False Futures. Deadwyler's work is a performance of movement, film, and sound. A hyperspace of reclamation, this work aligns Black past, present, and future with its chosen mediums, acting as the temporal characters to charge a wild, refined happening. This work explores race and gender, fusing imagery of practices of Black women's labor, domestic, sexual, emotional, with archived imagery from Civil War era United States to contemporary womanhood and futures. Deadwyler is also reflecting on her history and that of Atlanta, alongside contemporary concerns and activism happening in Atlanta. Deadwyler hopes to partner with Spelman to develop the work in its performance theater department. Welcome, Danielle Deadwyler.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me. Thank you so much, Ariel. Thank you, Ada, and thank you, Crystal, for your presentations as well. I am excited to share a kind of look at my process and a snippet of what Rules for Unsticking False Futures has been in this development process. Yes, I am a performance artist, a filmmaker, experimental filmmaker, and a dancer and an actor. And my work is a multimedia experience of sound and movement and film, and the exploration of the nature of Black quotidian life via the personal and the archive. And I'm rooted in dance, theater, and communications from Atlanta, Georgia. And as a working actor, I always intuited this need to mind the experimental and the abstraction in conjunction with commercial theater, film, and television, because I sought ownership over my artistic practice and wanted to sharply challenge myself. And so if we can begin with the first slide, that began my delving into live public performances. I dove into performance art, seeking to explore Black womanhood, Black motherhood, the labor of Black women, specifically looking at domestic and sexual work, as well as the public and private nature of that work. I'm interested in endurance, what it means for the body and the mind to endorse a particular practice, kind of a Pavlovian practice in the legacy of Black women's work. Additionally, intergenerational connectivity, and looking at this legacy of labor and fusing that with a hip hop sonic layering and taking a look at the impact of these ideals on Black folks' bodies. And so I continued to use theatrical elements with filmmaking and performance art to critically assess these themes through race, gender, and sexuality lenses. And so I began doing this multimedia performance work through creating these live public community engagements, literally on the streets of Atlanta. This image is of the third in a series called Bust It Open, where I was masked and costumed, moving, dancing, traveling with a chopped and screwed hip hop sound, and projected films onto different edifices, like the sides of office buildings or homes, and moving through Atlanta spaces, seeking to challenge the notion of what and how Black female subjectivity, Black woman subjectivity is looked at. We could go to the next slide. And since I've graduated to creating experimental narrative shorts, and this is inclusive of archival material. This image here is an archival image that shows how I try to toy with or redact, we'll probably get into this question a little bit later, but redacting what it means to think about history, in connection to the present, to think about history in connection to present bodies and contemporary bodies and what those bodies are doing. And so I've played these films in festivals and gallery spaces around the country. And that shifted me into making experimental documentaries, which is what Black Spatial Relics residency has supported me with, in making a documentary called Bust It Open, which is a part of the work, Rules for Unsticking False Futures. And then as recently as last month, I presented a first solo exhibition entitled Will to Adorn, which was a multimedia installation of film and sculpture, portraits, and relics that are rooted in Atlanta's history of the washerwomen strike. And the washerwomen strike was a pivotal turning point in Black labor resistance and valuation in the South, through a cohort of 3,000 women, a part of the Washing Society, and their cessation from labor in the summer of 1881. So I was seeking to juxtapose this Atlanta history with intergenerational personal experiences of labor of Black women. And I continue to do that through mining the archive, mining the personal, and striving towards this kind of liberatory abstraction that gets to happen with the experimentation. And so if we can go to the next slide, this is an image of one of those personal histories. So you see if we recall, the first slide is of a live performance that represents the surreality of the experience, of a redacting, of a recalling, of a redefining of the experience of Black women's bodies, of Black folks working in the South. And that took us to an archival image that's animated. I work with various folks to actualize these things, and I wanted to uplift, to shift what it means to actually look at the archival image by animating it, and then juxtapose that with live workings of these intergenerational women. So this is an image of Kendi, who is the youngest of the foursome of women that I explore in the documentary Bust It Open, which is the documentary that is a part of Rules for Unsticking False Futures. And I'm looking at each of these spheres of a surreality, which is in the performance, of the archive and how we can shift how we perceive history, and then this present, how that all intermingles together. And then in the actual performance of Rules for Unsticking False Futures, these four women, intergenerational women's experiences, get to be linked all through history, all through the present, all through the archive, and the surreal experience of the performance, in conjunction with live bodies performing movement in tandem with these with a DJ mix of the documentary. And so Black Spatial Relics kind of caught me in a transformative space where I am taking myself from the public space, the streets, being on streets literally, back into the interior. And it's allowed me to kind of clear my process and understand that I am deeply process centered. I am deeply time oriented. Time is imperative for my work. The ephemeral is an inherent aspect of my process, because I'm okay with, I'm trying to understand loss and yet appreciate what is gained as a result of memory, how memory is malleable, and further appreciating the endurance of Black folks to not only do hard labor, but to appreciate the innately soft nature of what we do. And if we can actually go to the last slide, which is representative of the exhibition that recently just closed. And in the background, you can see where each those monitors included the images or the work of the documentary that'll be a part of the Rules for Unsticking False Futures experience. And this is the Will to Adorn exhibit, which is getting into, which is me returning to interior spaces, me getting into actual, what does it mean to build a home that isn't a literal home? I know we talked about this a lot, or at least for me, I talked about this a lot in our cohort and with Omi about what it means to make a home. I know that this is my process now, home building or rehabilitating what I've understood to be foundations is imperative to my process. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Danny. Yeah, thank you, Danny. The work is so beautiful. Ooh, yeah, so much is coming up for me. Thank you for sharing, Danny. We now get to hear from Misty Sol. Misty Sol is a writer, visual artist, and performer from small town Pennsylvania. Who creates art that explores Black people's connections to nature, wellness, and speculation. Her paintings, children book illustrations, stories, and eco-practice are heavily influenced by Black history and aesthetics, particularly her grandmother's history as a migrant farm worker, midwife, and gifted storyteller in the early 20th century America. Misty's work, Other Ways of Knowing, is a multidisciplinary exploration of story, magic, and Black freedom space, inspired by a quote from the essay, Rootedness, The Ancestors as Foundation by Toni Morrison. We are very practical people, but within that practicality, we also accepted what I suppose could be called superstition and magic, which is another way of knowing things. Through painting, film, story, yoga, and music, located in the kitchen, on the farm, on the web, and on the telephone, this residency is about attention to acts of Blackness and seeks to create a personal liberation aesthetic. This work insists that even in the face of police violence, medical abuse, environmental degradation, and damning politics, Black people can theorize and realize other realities that can therefore always look forward to liberation and infinite evolution of wellness. When confronted with gaslighting and dismissal, we draw power from our ways of knowing. This is Afrofuturism. From the visions of Harriet Tubman to the metaphysical prowess of our praying grandmothers, this work explores reality through ritual, symbol, and shifting states of consciousness, faith, and sensation. This exploration is the portal to story, magical agency, and radical knowing. Welcome, Misty Sol.
Peace. Wonderful to be here with you all and introduce my work, talk about it a little bit. I am ready for my slides. Before I get started, I just want to thank you, Ariel, for including me in this magical cohort. I want to thank all of my fellow artists here that have been so inspirational and so brilliant throughout this process. And I'm continually awed by the ways that our processes and subject matter intersect. Even though we haven't truly worked together, we're drawn together. And I really applaud Ariel's brilliance in seeing that and bringing us all together. So this is Other Ways of Knowing, a multidisciplinary exploration of story, magic, and Black freedom space. So this first image here is of a painting, and this is a painting of my mother It's an abstraction. It's a coming through and an unveiling of her in my reality, and it represents the ways that ancestors dwell in our space, but in a sort of diaphanous way. Can we go to the next slide, please? And here's that quote again. We are very practical people, very down to earth, even shrewd people. But within that practicality, we also accepted what I suppose could be called superstition and magic, which is another way of knowing things. And she goes further to say that some of those things were discredited knowledge that Black people had, discredited because Black people were discredited. Can we go to the next slide? And so what they knew was discredited, and also because the press toward upward mobility would mean to get as far away from that kind of knowledge as possible. That kind of knowledge has a very strong place in my work. Toni Morrison, From Rootedness, The Ancestors as Foundation. So this theory is what really carries the work. And my curiosity about this other ways of knowing, this magic, this so-called superstition, which is actually a form of Black technologies and cosmology, is really what she's talking about in the context of our artwork, but really in the context of our lives. And I was interested, particularly in 2020, by the ways in which trauma can separate us from our spirit, can send us into fight or flight mode, into a place of disconnection where we're easily led, easily abused. And that's been a tactic that's been used to keep Black people down for countless millennia. And what our ancestors showed us is that if you can stay grounded, if you can be aware of your own inner knowing, then you can shape reality. And this is really the root to me of Afrocentric thinking. And these are the ways that our foremothers kept hope and possibility alive in the face of living hell in some points. This is how they were able to, this is how we're here, how we were able to survive by the magic of our ancestors. And so this project for me was about small walks of faith, shifting my states of consciousness into ways of inner knowing. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, so now that we've talked about the theory behind what I was doing, I'd like to talk about the form that this came in. We have this quote here in Barbara and Carl Millet's Black Theater, Premise and Presentation. The authors identify observable characteristics of Black performance aesthetics, notably that Black aesthetics are inherently interdisciplinary. And to give you a little bit of context, part of what really inspires me about Toni Morrison's essay in context is that what she's talking about is how we apply these other ways of knowing to our artwork. And what she's doing is really codifying the Black aesthetic in her writing. And so because I look at all Black art as performative, inherently, it's really interesting to me to hear Toni Morrison talk about call and response and the inclusion of music in her writing and the inclusion of nature and how these different things fit together. So how I approach a project is inherently interdisciplinary, and a lot of times the theory will inform the form that it takes. And so for this particular project, my practice of painting ancestors, my practice of yoga, my garden practice, my food preparation practice, performance, ritual, writing, and story all came together to help to shift our consciousness into a space of confidence in our inner ways of knowing. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. Yeah, so talking again about Toni Morrison and context, she says, there are things that I try to incorporate directly into my fiction that are directly and deliberately related to what I regard as major characteristics of Black art. I had to provide spaces so that the reader can participate. And so what she's talking about in this part of the essay is call and response, and how that's another characteristic, a notable observable characteristic of Black aesthetics. And when I talk about Black aesthetics, I'm not necessarily talking about an art form that's separate from our lives, something that sits in a gallery space. I'm talking about hyper-present daily rituals that become our art, that then can fuel a more refined is the wrong word, that can then inspire what we would see as fine art, but that's pulled from this rich well of Black culture and Black aesthetics that is made up of what common people do every day and how we live our lives. And so for this project, because it was so deeply personal for me, I wanted to find a way to create a community around this sort of knowledge, this idea of magic and superstition, and figuring out how this work was the call, but how would I get the response? My original idea was to have a virtual conversation where I would interview different Black women and talk to them about their other ways of knowing. But I ended up turning the project on its head and beginning with my own story. And so this space here, this garden space that you see in some of these pictures, became really grounding for me. And from this garden space, I was able to do altar rituals, growing rituals, different projects in community with different women farming their herbs, cooking from these spaces, just creating these private rituals. And from there, we did a non-narrative abstract film. And the film itself becomes a gateway to story. The film itself is a vehicle to advertise a hotline number that folks can call and hear a story, hear a meditation, or leave a story. And so I decided that was the way that I would invite the community into the conversation, and that's how I would get the stories. So at this point, we've done the film. It's just about finished. I have the hotline number, and I'm just waiting to put that all together and present it to the public. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay. And I talked about this painting a little bit in the beginning. This is acrylic on canvas with a little bit of collage work and mixed media. But it relates to this part of Toni Morrison's essay. And from the title, we have the ancestors as foundation. So these ancestors are not just parents, they are sort of timeless people whose relationship to the character in her novels are benevolent, instructive, protective, and they provide a certain kind of wisdom. And so that quote from the essay was very important to me because painting my ancestors, painting family members is the foundation of my visual art practice and the foundation of my spiritual practice. So this was a portrait of my mother. And this painting was part of how experimenting with platforms, this is going to go onto my website along with the video. Another symbol to notice here is the petticoat that my mom is wearing in this portrait. Can I have the next slide? Petticoats and collaboration. On the left, you see the photo that I used as inspiration for that painting. That's my mother at her prom. I think it was 1960. And on the right, that's me and collaborator Rhonda Rise. She is a vocalist, actress, dancer, just all around powerhouse interdisciplinary artist that I've worked with a lot in the past. And I wanted her to help me represent this idea of getting to know the self and embodying these other ways of knowing and these acts of heightened awareness of our Blackness. And so she came into the garden with me and we performed a series of rituals that were photographed and videotaped. And she also provided some of the vocals that are going to go onto the final cut of the film. Can we go to the next slide? Also, as you can see, this aesthetic with petticoats was really important to me, just the imagery of it. If you can see in a lot of the earlier garden photos, I have those on as well. And I just wanted to name my collaborators here before I finish up. I worked with Muti Reed, who helped me to interpret the raw footage as the editor of the film, and also the sound editor, Christian Hayden, who provided the cinematography. Rhonda Rise, we talked about with acting and vocals. I Am Victorious also helped out with vocals, and Ralph Aniba, one of my creative partners, scored that for me. Can I have the next slide, please? And finally, with creating these altars and creating these small rituals, object symbolism was very important to me. And this is a Benny seed wafer. It's a traditional recipe from the Carolinas, and the Benny seed is an African seed. It's a sesame seed, one of the world's oldest foods, and it's a seed that we brought with us. Probably one of the seeds that we wore in our hair when we came here. And for me, it represents the ancestors. The molasses is representative of Black people in modernist iconography. And to me, the combination of the molasses and the bene seeds is a symbol of possibility. It's a symbol of the sweetness of our futures and our evolution. And I'm just really excited to see this work continue. I'm going to cook these live when I do my workshop in a few days. Can you go to the next slide? And I just want to give special thanks to the Color Growth Museum. As further iterations of this work progress, we would like to have some of those conversations about other ways of knowing and how magic and so-called superstition, how our Black cosmology show up in our lives. And so we'll probably do that this spring. I also want to give a special thanks to Afrofuturist authors Stephen Barnes and Sanana Reed-Dew. They mentored me during the process. Also, so did the Color Growth Museum, Sashi Dubois. But Stephen Barnes and Sanana Reed-Dew really helped me with this idea of writing as a path to revolution and personal evolution. And I studied with author Stephen Barnes, metaphysics and techniques to clear out the inner debris and detritus that comes as a result of constantly being discredited, that discrediting that Toni Morrison talks about, so that we can fully inhabit our ways of knowing and all of life's sweetness and our full humanity and subjectivity. And so as I continue this work, I'm just experimenting with that, what it means to be a human being in full power and in full spirit. The last slide, please. And finally, special thanks to Black Spatial Relics 2021, the residents and the residency. I'm infinitely grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Misty. Yeah, that work is so robust and reaching and sprawling and yeah. Thank you to all of y'all. I desire us to be together, to feel applause together, to feel that vibration off of each other's bodies. But I just want to say that I am in that energy and giving thanks, and I imagine many others are as well. Yes. So I think now, if we can spotlight Misty and Crystal and Ada and Danny and myself, we will be in conversation together. Yeah, if y'all could turn y'all's cameras on, if possible. So I have some questions that I sent y'all, and this is also the time for y'all to begin in the chat and on Facebook, drumming up your questions. Drumming up your questions. So I want to first lift that you all are in the work and lifting the work of Saidiya Hartman and the work of critical fabulation and the work of working with Black womanhood and historiography in ways that that make me proud, that do us justice, that are building out and swelling and completing and filling. And I just want to hear more about what brought you to that, what brings you to this moment in that. And I also want to hear about we just heard about the archives that you're building and the archives that you're contributing to. And I just want to hear about your hopes for the futures of the ability to access what it is that you have built for folks down the line, for folks in another time. Should there be another time, hopefully. Don't want to make any assumptions. We can hold all of that. So yeah, I just want to lift that, and whoever would like to start can start.
I tend to be the one to jump out there, so here we go. Yeah, we got this. I've been thinking about it, and it seems historiography has been a part of the process the entire time, because we go into the archive because we're interested in what's happening. We're interested in who made these images, why did they make these images this way? And when thinking about Saidiya Hartman's Wayward Lives, we know that there wasn't a lot of agency, what agency often, right, in recording of the self. And so for me, I am constantly flowing in and out of the present, in and out of history, in and out of the imaginative, whatever, futurity there may be, and shifting and changing what that is like. So the work is constantly talking to each other and building on what was, what is, what will be, and and so redaction is a major effort. I know with Christina Sharp's Wake, in the Wake, Being in Blackness talks about that as a practice in dealing with trauma spaces and dealing with Black experiences. And so redacting or shifting the archive image in my work, and I saw it in somewhat in Crystal's, is a part of my practice. And then just recalling again the dialogue that is had by juxtaposing the historical images, the archive, by juxtaposing that with the imaginative, which is the surreal, these performances that I've done, and then bringing in the personal, which is women actually people speaking for themselves about what their experiences are. That is all a part of the historiography that is going on in my work, and which I'm recognizing in others' work. And these modalities of doing that are coming through in the literature, from Sadi Hartman, from Christina Sharp. So these are texts that are supporting my understanding of how to go about doing that. And then furthermore, I want to go about doing that with community, and that's the effort that I'm trying to make tomorrow with my workshop, and bringing community in to recognize these shifts that we can make together. And the hope for the future is that kind of stuff continues to happen. I'm constantly trying to have dialogue with all of the spheres. Maybe I'm doing too much. Psych, that's not true. You can be doing more, but finding that balance in trying to navigate all of those spaces is imperative to me, and that's how I feel like I've been employing it.
Yeah, I mean,
You want someone else to answer? I'm sorry. I wasn't sure if you wanted someone else to answer or if we. Okay. So moving into the future, I think my priority is just present. I talked a little bit about a program that I was doing with clearing spiritual space for to be able to inhabit those other ways of knowing, to be able to trust your own heart, your own judgment as a Black woman in the world when you're constantly being told, no, that's not right. And when you've been being told that for centuries, I think I would like to do more work that recognizes presence as a spiritual practice. That's one of the things that I learned in that program, just being present, paying attention as a spiritual practice. And so I think that paying attention will create the critical shift that we need in consciousness to begin to heal ourselves, the planet, to be on a trajectory toward wellness collectively, towards being able to collectively imagine and build future spaces, right? Yeah, I think that's what I want to see happen with my work. And while I'm reaching forward with that, I want to continue to reach back and around and visually record our archives, including my own personal family history, but also I'm interested in archival Black family portraiture. I'm also interested in maybe taking a look at the other side of the spectrum and some of the images that Danielle was talking about, where folks didn't have as much agency, and I'm referring to anthropological photographs and texts and these things that need to be rewritten if we're going to create a new and different future. So that's how I am.
Yeah, what started this work, literally, I woke up one morning and it kind of stirred me, right? So I had literally spent a long period of time looking at or experiencing this monument to white supremacy in a town where my family's from in Mississippi. And I woke up one morning, I was like, well, we have to create some architectures for our stories, right? So something woke me up and got me on that path for real. And have been working on it ever since. But, you know, and I think that is how, you know, because that's the thing, right? Like as the historians have their like particular tools and their particular language, right? But as artists, like so much of what we do is communicate the things that cannot be spoken and create the space for new languages. But then also I oftentimes think like, well, what would have been my great grandmother's mother tongue anyways, right? Like I just wonder, this is something that I've been thinking through. So that's, you know, that's also something that is ongoing, that's at the bottom of it all. Yeah, so thinking about how to render the spirit, right? And how to make the spirit, or to reground, because a lot of folks are really upset, you know? So thinking through how to tell or create space for these stories to be heard and honor the stories as well. Yeah.
Likewise, I think, you know, every time we sort of have these convenings, I realize we have more in common in our practices thematically and conceptually, in sort of reaching back and reaching forward. And one of the things that really sort of struck me when I moved to Tulsa 5 years ago was, you know, I thought I would go back and I would find all of this physical materiality of Greenwood and be able to sort of access the physicality of that space. But what I found was much of that architecture was gone. Most of the people were gone. And that site has been redeveloped now, like very rapidly over the last 5 years, into a site of hotels and condos and you know, luxury apartment buildings. And a museum will be erected later this year. So I think part of my interest and desire in going back to those photos of women in Greenwood and men in Greenwood, but focusing mostly on the women, was the story that is popularly told doesn't mention so many women. They're left out of the narrative of that history often. And I also wanted to think about like quotidian experience, like what is the daily life? How are people, you know, how do people interact with land? Like they touch this land and they were here and, you know, they didn't have to be excellent or important in the way that like many times we go back and think about Black excellence being the only form of memory we should go back to. Like, I think it's important that we acknowledge the people that were just there. And so that's part of what I was reaching back towards.
Thank you, Crystal. Thank y'all. Thank y'all. I think what we are moving toward or circling around right now feels like it's in conversation with with the personal spiritual attraction, need, calling of and for and to this work. And I kind of asked this question a bit of Ebony yesterday. Like kind of the question was like, what was the question? What was the idea or thought or breath that you were with in the beginning that is something entirely otherwise now? And I wonder, I wonder about dramaturgy. I wonder about the process that you all have been in together with Omi, and what that journeying has looked like. And if you could give us a little bit of what that journey has been for you and for your work and your project over the last several months inside of dramaturgy.
Okay, I'm diving again, and I say Omi is base god, right? Like she. Okay, so Omi is pushing you in the way. Like, so I come from theater, and dramaturgy is a part of the theatrical development process. Like the play is dependent on the dramaturgical support for understanding of historical basis in the world of the play, for specific idiosyncrasies, and that has understanding that does not go away because of medium. And Omi has pushed me into looking at forms of movement, who in dance. She like pushed me to Blondell Cummings. She pushed me to all these other like artists who are doing interesting things that are not necessarily the interdisciplinary practice that I am doing, but she's encouraging me to rethink how I seek to present it by pushing me in all of these different directions. So my web is opened up, and then the web opens up even further by the conversations that are had with Misty and Ada and Crystal. Like it's it brings you kind of like out of it, or at least brought me out of the initial skeleton that like had been ruling me. Everything I was doing, like, you stick to the bones that you have prescribed to yourself. It's centered on Octavia Butler. Yes, these rules, like, but it's bigger than and yet still connected to the initial DNA, because you never, like, you have an intention for the start of a work, but then that begins to shift the more information that comes into you, the more you're feeling as a result of the work that you're doing. So she took it also to, Omi did, a grounding, and we're talking about the spiritual practice of convening together, of what does each other's energy do for our processing what our work seeks to do, and then having a conversation with how are you receiving what Danielle is seeking to do. All of that is not typically a part of my personal artistic practice. I know that happens on sets, right? On production sets, on theatrical sets, but that's collaborative in a specific way. That is always, but this is something else. And so to have Omi and to have the cohort telling me, encouraging me to move in directions that that they feel, that they further understand, and then to stay fully invested in what I'm intending to do. It's been encouraging, deeply encouraging.
Right. I just wanted to add to that. Thank you for that. I don't have a background in theater, so it's interesting to hear you, Danny, speak about that and how that sort of normally plays in. I just wanted to say quickly that Omi really encouraged us to sort of think through our ancestral knowledge and sort of tap into folks who have been there before us and how they're speaking through us now, like what we carry of our ancestors and what they may or may not be communicating, and how we can sort of work through that in what we're doing now. And I think that was really profound to sort of realize and circle back to, and especially the exercise of writing from my grandmother's voice specifically, which was incredibly hard to do. And it ended up being, like 5 lines, but those 5 lines really meant a lot. So thank you, Omi.
Yes, I echo that. Omi really helped me to stay grounded, and that writing from our ancestors' perspective activity or series of activities really helped. And I, like I came into this project with a whole other concept, which is I was gonna, think through like I was literally gonna just research the languages. That was what I was thinking, right? It was just gonna be a sound piece, an abstract sound piece. Literally, that's what it was gonna be. And I was gonna research the languages, the West African languages that might have ended up in Maryland and create a piece based off of that. But through this ancestral work that Omi had me go down, it, all the grandmothers were like, no, you got to find out what happened with Lucy Jackson and tell, you know what I mean? So I'm really thankful for that. Because I think also, like recentering the work from the abstract to the story, right? Or to how to drive the story, or how to consider the story through abstraction was very, very helpful. And I'm very thankful for that.
Yes, I just wanted to echo what everyone said. I do have a performance background, a little bit of experimental theater background, but I don't have a lot of experience with a dramaturg. And what the experience, what it reminded me of was how when folks use their friends as therapists, and then you finally go to a professional, you're like, oh, this is how you really do it. I felt like the experience of having a professional listen to my ideas and create space for me to figure things out. And it's really a credit to Omi and to Black Spatial Relics that we have this venue that supports this alternative performance aesthetic. Because I knew it was going to be a performance, but for me, a lot of times, part of the work is figuring out what that means. So it may not be performance in the way that we're used to seeing. And I feel like Omi made space for that. She made space specifically for me for a redefining of what audience means. Because I feel like in a lot of the work that I did throughout the residency, we had the ancestors as witness and audience and self, and she was able to work with me with that. And so, yeah, I just think it's wonderful that she could help me with things that look like traditional performance, but also with my writing or just planting seeds, help me to figure out how that was performative and how, I could help to communicate with the ancestors, like Crystal said, or a broader audience. So, yes, I'm grateful.
Beautiful. Yeah, so we could witness all night for Omi Oshun, Jonelle Jones, and that would be worthwhile. And I just also want to, because someone said earlier, someone listed in the chat about like curating y'all as a cohort. That's not what I did. And I just also, so like, I want to like, I want to just call in some names. I'm just feeling so like it's so important for us to be talking about the collaborative work of everything, of what Black Spatial Relics is, the collaborative work of that. And to lift that, like, dramaturgy is something that I wanted to make sure was rooted in this. And it was conversations with Alexis Pauline Gumbs that like made me like be like, all right, how are we gonna figure out how to root and have a dramaturg in residence, and like the gift that is Omi in this process. And I also want to lift our selection committee, of which I am not a part, to be clear, that was this year Muti Reed, Jumatatu Poe, J.D. Stokely, and Adaye Futura Moon, whose all of whose work I also adore and love. It seems like I was told to check my phone that there are questions from the Facebook. Okay. 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 I have two questions from Facebook. I want to, in advance, I just want to drop one question that I've just been curious about, and then I will pull from these. One question I've been curious about is, what does like transfiguration and like appearances across your work look like in a world where a figure, a spirit, a witness, a character, like from your work shows up in a cohort member's work? Like, what is that? And maybe like one person could riff on that, and then we can move to a few questions from Facebook. Or like two people, maybe. Yeah.
I mean, I was gonna say so much of Black creative production really is improvisational, right? And I think there's something to be said about that, because we are communicating through our ancestors, like even the way the drum beats, right? Like, how is it possible, or the way that we're moving when we're dancing, right? Like, how is it possible for the same movements to come up in contemporary dance culture, right, in the US, and you see it in traditional indigenous cultures on the continent of Africa, right? The only way that's possible is through that ancestral connection, and that comes through improv. That's what I think, but but it's also true, right? It's like it just happens in the subconscious.
Beautiful. I am going to share a question from Facebook. What is the biggest shift from where you started and where you are now in your process?
I'd say with Omi's dramaturgical support, locating and understanding that I create homes. That was big for me. And learning that I've kind of been doing that in various ways, and recognizing that this is a home, that this is a ceremonial space, that this is a ritual practice, that this performance is seeking to be. It's not just some kind of didactic attempt to let people know this thing. This is a feeling experience. This is a communal experience, in conjunction with being aware of the histories, in conjunction with being a rehabilitator, a group, a kind of architectural digging into the foundations or lack thereof, or of what a Black, experience household is. What are these interiors, and how do we reset them for the futures? So coming into that understanding was big and helpful, and really stirring me in how I've been thinking about the work lately.
I'll share another question from Facebook. Is there a need or desire for communing and further development of collaborations that bring along little sisters to greater awareness?
I can answer this one. And it's a wonderful opportunity for me to shout out my mentor, the Color Girls Museum. I'm a part of a project that they're doing right now called The First Time I Ever Saw Your Face. And it's a project where Black women interview and paint younger Black women between the ages of 8 and 18. And it's just a project that's really meant to uplift and to redirect the gaze that's directed at Black girls, and to honor them and to celebrate their bigness and their greatness. And I think there's definitely a need for more of that. I think all of our work has this sort of Sankofa type vibe to it, where there's this idea that you reach forward and you reach back. There's this rhythm to it, like the ocean, right? And so, yes, definitely. I mean, even that reference to the ocean makes me think about Yamaya and mothering. So, in that vein, yeah, I definitely think it's necessary, and I think it's something that we're all doing to some extent.
I realized mistakenly that I meant for there to be space for you all to ask each other questions, for there to be some talking across. And so, yeah, I want to open that up.
I'll go first. I have a question for Danielle. And I wanted to know, what are the elements that make up a home for you? And those could be material or conceptual. So if you could give me almost like a bullet list.
Oh my goodness. I've on a personal level, like, it's really turned into people. As someone who's been traveling a lot, home is just the people, and recognizing how much it is myself. And so, in thinking of this work, what are the bodies doing, the performative bodies doing in the space, and how the audience is a part of that. You don't get to be, passive in this experience. The audience is a part of the ceremonial ritualistic practice. And so everybody is the home space. Everybody is acting and reacting, and I'm just committed to the body, to every Black folks and folks in general who will be in this kind of Black box space are the makings of home. It doesn't feel like, and memory is in the making of home, because tomorrow we'll be working through gesture. That's the making of home. How has your grandmother informed the way you do domestic life, or how has your sister, or your brother informed the way you do the things you do. And so these, this old school flavor is informing this new school flavor to come together to make to remake and refashion the foundation. So I root everything in the people. It's rooted in the collaborative effort. It's never the things. So thank you, Misty.
Thank you.
I have a question. I'm sorry. I have a question for Crystal. And that question is, when you start to make your work, do you think about the concept or you think about the sense? that you want the audience to have?
That's a good question. I think there's usually one, I tend to fixate on one thing. So there's usually one thing that stands out to me or I can't stop thinking about. And that thing comes back to me. Sometimes it's years later. I revisit it, but it's a feeling. It's a feeling that I get from looking at an image or being in a place or being in contact with the material or hearing a story that that doesn't make sense to me completely. So in my head, I'm trying to work out like, well, how did that happen if X and Y and Z, keep unfolding in different ways? So often there's like a problem and I'm trying to think through it in the work, or there's a person that I want to spend time with in an image or, things like that. So it's really sort of like an excuse in a way sometimes to just be with that idea or be with that individual for a longer period of time.
Mm. It's beautiful. Because I like how it's like, it's interesting. You approach it like a science, like this is the hypothesis. Like if, you know what I mean? Like the imagining as a science or as a, right? Because with the smell, right? Like that first installation that you showed with the smell of something burning, right? Like that's imagining if you were in that experience. It's beautiful.
Oh,
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. I had a general question for folks. I just sort of wanted to hear more about the role of magic and magic as a power and ritual as a power in your practices.
One of the things I really wanted to do with this project, and I don't know if it came through in the talk, but originally this grew out of some work that I did at a college with young Black women where we made keys and based on our own individual needs and talked about the ways in which Black women's self-care rituals really came out of these magical traditions, right? I think it's the idea for me that there are things that Western society can't explain. There are technologies that we possess and that we still possess that we can tap into to connect to each other and to improve our lives. And so part of what I'm looking to do at the end of the project is collect these experiences from folks. Like, how do you experience magic? For some people, it might be in how they dream. And for some people, it might be the feeling that they get. Some people, it might be a sense of rhythm. It could be that you never have to measure or use a recipe because you have this perfect sense of seasoning or this power of healing. I feel like a magician when I go into a field and I can identify, edible medicinals and foods. And so I'm talking about supernatural, but I'm also talking about the natural, and I'm talking about just things that have been discredited or dismissed as not a part of reality. Just investigating all of that.
Misty, you're making me think about sort of like parts of magic, like there's this like hokey magic where there's a deception, right? On one hand, like the magic is to deceive or like to change the perception of someone, right? And on the other hand, there's this magic where like the kind of magic that I think you're talking about, where like the power of that magic is to see the potential of something, to see and imagine that it can do more than what you're seeing in front of you.
Yeah, I love that. That gets back to the value of the quotidian in the Black experience. You know, to be like, dreams are huge for me. Dreams were huge for Harriet Tubman, right? And so to think about like dreams tell us what to do. So as to think of that as a magical quality, just, you know, that's beautiful.
And it takes humility to say, I'm open. Maybe I don't know. So I'm open to the possibilities of what there might be.
And that makes me have a question for Ada. Like, you were talking about like being open to the possibilities. Was Lucy Jackson not initially a focal point at the top? Like, could you expound on that a little bit more? Yeah.
Nope. No. For real, like actually she was not a focal point of it, right? And it, you know, her story came up after some research and a lot of like time and silent reflection, right? Like a lot of moments to sit with the research, but then also, you know how sometimes like you could spend a lot, like hours and hours on a thing, and then you sit still with it and then you pick it up again, and then that thing, the answer, you know, comes to you. That's what happened. That's for real what happened. So, and I think that really came from that regrounding workshop, right, with Omi, and directing that, because, you know, I come from a Southern Baptist background, right? Like, so this idea of magic is something that, you know, we have been, you know, for generations told to stay away from, right? And it's not, this isn't, I mean, this is something that I think that comes up in my performance work too, though, right? Like when you're doing an endurance performance, there is something that happens in the space in between yourself and the air, right? Like there's something that happens where on a molecular level that changes the air, right? So, but that usually happens at the actual moment of the performance, not before, not in this research. So yeah, not in the research moment. But yeah, that was completely, you know, it was a magical, or a moment of regrounding and becoming more aware, right, of the technology that's already there. Yeah.
I've so enjoyed being able to see y'all in this questioning and this cross questioning. We are now 25 minutes over, and we could go over into infinity. But I want to, in respect to our time, it is getting a little later up in here, close us, you know, close us for now, knowing that we continue and the conversation reverberates and moves. I want to thank y'all. And if y'all are at home, like however you think, however you are able to give thanks. I don't even know, I don't know webinar well enough to be able to like have the little reactions that I usually get to do in meetings, but I'm feeling all of those for all of your work, and such gratitude for your work for us and in the world. Thank you. And thank y'all who were in attendance and with us. I want to invite you to the workshops that begin tomorrow. Forgive me, who has the 11 a.m. workshop? Yes, Danielle Deadwyler's workshop is at 11 a.m. I'm excited to be there. Who has the 3 p.m. workshop tomorrow? Ada, is it you? Right. I love it.
Yeah.
All good. Come through Ada's workshop tomorrow, and Crystal and Misty's workshop on Friday. Also tomorrow evening, Shanel Edwards is curating this beautiful Black Philly Caribbean Zine share out. A number of members of our community have been building a zine about Black Caribbeanness in Philadelphia, and they'll be sharing that work tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. Help me out, y'all, I believe. And then again on Friday, we will have a Black Diaspora Salon that will be hosted by Jumatatu Poe, featuring Muti Reed, who is here with us now, and a number of other artists. So come through. Yeah, and then we will conclude on Saturday with a keynote from Germaine, Ingram, and another washing over of the libation from Viktor Lee. So much more to be with. Thank y'all for being here. Good night.